Little girl reveals missing millionaire's brother's location, but moments later, something terrible happens. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The scream sliced through the muggy afternoon air like a blade, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic town at precisely 3 o'clock. The widowed millionaire, 52 years old, almost dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxurious apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the clapboard house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window frames that contrasted sharply with the sleek lines of the modern building where he lived. As the owner of one of the largest construction companies in the region, he was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to stay away from other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone. Ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the clapboard house, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her few years of life insufficient to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the alcohol, fixed on the child trembling before her. "You're a blight on this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred from the bourbon she'd been drinking since noon at the local dive bar. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that joined the other scars that dotted her thin arms. The child bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screaming only enraged her Aunt Moore, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before she went to sleep. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whining," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you mess up the walls again with that filthy charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The millionaire stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she was cooking, a folk song that talked about free birds. But where was it coming from? He went back to the window, his eyes scanning the facade of the clapboard house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that struck a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. In the house next door to the clapboard, the 61-year-old retired teacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girl singing. Unlike the millionaire, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. And that voice carried a pain that made her heart clench. The educator had noticed that the girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in town. She dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. She hadn't had a proper conversation with the alcoholic aunt in a long time, and perhaps it was time to get to know the little girl better. Meanwhile, the millionaire remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The song had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of his former employee who had resigned abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before the accident. She was a gentle woman, always humming while organizing the construction company's files. Then, suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought about her again, until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to suffer in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, the millionaire closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. Night fell over the historic town, but the echo of that childish song continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent 5 years running away from his responsibilities. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical bustle of the historic town, waking up for another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the clapboard house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning," said the teacher with her most gentle smile. "I've come to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper chat." The aunt hesitated, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, teacher, It's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The educator took a step forward, forcing the woman to back away. "And I would very much like to meet your niece. I hear she's a lovely girl." The aunt's face hardened for a moment before forcing a wan smile. "The girl is sick, high fever. Better not to get close." At that moment a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Perhaps I can help," the educator insisted. "I have experience with sick children, raised 3 myself. You know how it is." "No need, really," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a flu. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the woman's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her even at such an early hour. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the millionaire watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than normal, disturbed by confused dreams where a child's voice mingled with memories of his former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the clapboard house, a strange curiosity washed over him. The educator finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not without casting an investigative glance into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the clapboard house, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height did not allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the woman growled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, Auntie," the girl mumbled, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single mango tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the stove. It was always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the child in the yard under the strong midday sun. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the millionaire's ears again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song. He took out his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee used to hum that same song while working. She always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a girl named... "The girl," muttered the millionaire, the cell phone trembling in his hands. His former employee's daughter was named exactly the same as the child who was singing across the street. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the gentle woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made this connection before? The millionaire put his cell phone away and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered his former employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems at the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. Now 5 years later, that woman's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including the regret for not having helped his employee when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock, punctually, the screams started again. This time, the millionaire did not step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the clapboard house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He grabbed his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands. It appeared to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure that he could barely make out. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the millionaire couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? His fortunes accumulated over the years through investments in stocks and real estate funds gave him resources. But wealth doesn't solve all problems, especially when it comes to a child in danger and a dysfunctional family that prefers to hide its secrets. That night, the girl slept on the floor of the yard, where her aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the mango tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her out of that place of pain. 3 days had passed since the millionaire discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the retired teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the clapboard house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting a new direct visit to the alcoholic aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from which she had the best view of the backyard of the clapboard house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the mango tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the educator, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined, much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said the little girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, sweetie," replied the educator, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The child glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "I'm fine. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Girl, where are you?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the educator needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran inside the house, but not before looking once more at the teacher with an expression that screamed for help. The educator remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to her aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the millionaire had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he managed to see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the child's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt genuine rage burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived. And now, this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best Sunday dress, grabbed a tray of homemade cookies she had baked as a pretext, and headed to the clapboard house again. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's persistence. "Teacher, I already told you it's not a good time." "Honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," interrupted the educator firmly, "and I insist on getting to know the little one better. As old neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. The interior of the clapboard house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," lied the aunt, blocking the way to the back of the house. "That's a shame." "Maybe another time then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that appeared to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and mainly small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The educator and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then, but remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything." Anything at all. The educator's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, the aunt slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The child had cried when she heard the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with the familiar fury. "No, Auntie, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. The child recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to get attention, don't you?" hissed the woman as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? You think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the millionaire had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated worker who always talked about her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His wealth, accumulated through years of hard work and strategic investments in real estate funds, gave him the resources needed to act. As the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the millionaire made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal attorney and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the child's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it may be a matter of life and death." That night, after the aunt fell asleep drunk on the living room sofa, the girl managed to sneak out to the yard. Her new burns burned, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the mango tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering, and that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The millionaire had finally found the courage to use his wealth and influence for something bigger than his own interests, even if it meant confronting the demons of his past. The attorney arrived at the millionaire's apartment on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been colleagues at university almost 3 decades ago, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. That's why the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Robert, sitting in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The millionaire poured coffee and stood by the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked Robert, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The millionaire paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, Robert, evidence of what's happening." Robert was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the millionaire, running his hands over his face. "But there's something else. My former employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before the accident. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible," completed Robert, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The millionaire nodded. "If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with this woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screaming echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and Robert could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 in the afternoon religiously, but sometimes also at other times," replied the millionaire, grabbing his cell phone. "Do you want to see the recordings?" Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As an attorney specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence deeply disturbed him. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney's office. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, the girl lived another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the child had made on the kitchen wall during the early hours. "How many times do I have to tell you not to mess up the walls?" shouted the aunt, holding the girl by the arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a blight, a curse on this house," the child tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. "You're going to be locked in the room until I decide what to do with you," continued the woman, pushing the girl down the hallway. "And if I hear even a peep, you'll experience a punishment you've never experienced before." The room where the child was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach. There, she curled up in the corner and began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have forgotten that she existed. It was this song that the retired teacher heard when she passed by the house on her way to the grocery store. The educator had spent the entire night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. The teacher stopped in front of the gate and listened. The girl's voice was weak, but filled with a sadness that made the educator's heart break. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the grocery store, the teacher went directly to the city center, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the caseworker well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "Anna, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. The caseworker looked up from the papers she was analyzing. "Teacher, it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." The caseworker straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years as a caseworker, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and the teacher wasn't the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said Anna, picking up a complaint form. While the educator recounted her observations, on the other side of town, Robert was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. The district attorney listened attentively as Robert presented the evidence collected by the millionaire. "This is compelling evidence," said the district attorney, examining the videos on Robert's cell phone. "I'm going to order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will that take?" asked Robert, worried. "With this evidence? We can act today," replied the district attorney. "I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now." It was thus that, by a coincidence that would change the girl's destiny, 2 simultaneous complaints arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. Anna was finishing writing down the teacher's account when her phone rang. "Child Protective Services, Anna speaking." "Anna, this is the district attorney. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Main Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse." Anna paused, the pen suspended over the paper. Is it by chance number 127? Yellow clapboard house? Exactly. How did you know? I just received a complaint about the same house, replied Anna, looking at the teacher with surprise. 2 independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being mounted. Anna, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Main Street. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The millionaire watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the child's life forever. You did the right thing, said Robert, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder. I hope it's not too late, replied the millionaire, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the clapboard house. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at the local bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anna knocked on the door of the clapboard house and received no response, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in all rooms. It was the teacher who first heard the weak voice coming from the room at the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team through the hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl curled up in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The child raised her big, frightened eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, sweetie," said Anna, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anna. We've come to help you." The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the gentle lady who had talked to her in the yard. A flash of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. "Auntie will be mad," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said the educator, reaching out her hand to the girl. "We're going to get you out of here, okay?" And so, after 8 months of silent suffering, the child was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear, beginning a journey that would lead her back to the light she had lost when her parents passed away.